From the EPR Creation Studio, this is Jason Staples bringing you Unconquered with Doc Staples. As always, this podcast brought to you by EPR Creations, bringing you the best of internet marketing and website development for an affordable price. And by Luis Marquez of Momentum Realty in Jacksonville, Florida, by Shenandoah Newsma of shenrealestate.com in the Research Triangle of North Carolina, and by Garage Makeovers, the #1 garage remodeling company in South Florida. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get to this. I've got some questions, some mailbag stuff that I should get to before doing the full Stanford preview. So I'm going to get to those first. So first question is, why is Florida State struggling so much on the back end on defense? I know about lack of talent, but it appears the guys are lost, don't know where they're supposed to be, and communication is poor. Tony White has mentioned guys being misaligned. Why is that still an issue through 5 games of the season? With him and Zach Arnett, you'd think the back end wouldn't be bad. It's a great question. And, this is something that both of my film breakdowns this week, and I did both of them on the defense, actually did one myself, and then actually did another one with Dontavius Jackson, former excellent Florida State linebacker in the Jimbo and Willie Taggart era. And we took a look through and focused really on that back end, especially at linebacker, and looked at what the problems were as far as we could tell. And there were definitely some problems. And, it's not clear to us. It wasn't clear to me. It's not clear to him. It's not clear to several other people that I've talked to on this, why they are struggling so much on the back end. There are certain things that are happening that just should not be happening. I mean, there was one play where you're looking at, it was 2nd and 6. And when the quarterback threw the football, they were in a 3 deep, and all 3 safeties were 22 to 25 yards deep. That's inexplicable. The deepest wide receiver was at 15 yards. And so those 3 safeties were playing so deep that there was just an enormous gap in the middle of the field. And you're just like, son, what are you doing? I mean, I understand, they hammered into these guys, I think, after the Miami game, deeper than the deepest. Yeah, I get that. But, you just can't just get on your horse and just run to the goal line kind of thing. And some of that stuff's happening. I mean, you wonder exactly why those things are happening. And I don't know. I don't know the answer, because some of these things, some of this stuff's just high school stuff. Stuff that, Tony White's been a successful coach before. Both Syracuse and Nebraska got a lot better when he arrived, year 1. Arnett has run good defenses before. And say what you want about Florida State's back end. It's not as talented as say, the 2013 team, obviously, or the 2023 team, but they're not completely talent deficient on the back end. When we came into the season, the big question mark was edge. And then the next question mark was, are they going to be good enough at safety and depth at defensive tackle? But they've been really good at defensive tackle. Edge has been a problem. And then the whole back 7, really back 8 as they play it, has not been great. So I wish I could answer this better, but the fact is they've not been good enough. And they've left a lot of space the whole way. Some of it is just that they're in a different system than what they've run. And, White likes to have disguise and try to show different things and communicate and get different calls and rotate and all that. But they haven't been asking him to do too much, not in my view. And they just haven't gotten it done. So I don't know why. I don't know why. All right, second question. You've mentioned spot dropping versus pattern matching. Why doesn't Tony White use more pattern matching? And does Tony know how to teach pattern matching? We're getting killed and it's basic pitch and catch. Well, the reason that they're not using pattern matching is pretty simple. And that is that if you are going to be a pattern matching defense, you kind of have to invest heavily in that as what you're going to do. It's hard to teach. I remember talking to Jimbo Fisher about this years ago, back in, 2011 or 2012, and, talking about pattern matching and how difficult it is to teach. And he said, really, the biggest difficulty of teaching pattern matching is the linebackers. You can do it more easily at at corner and safety, but the linebackers in pattern matching defenses, they really have to respond and react well, and they've got to be really smart and also quick enough to do it. But it's really about how smart they are. And I think that right there is a big factor here. So, what White likes to do is, instead of pattern matching, and actually I should take a step back and sort of explain what pattern matching is. Pattern matching is a way to essentially hybridize man and zone coverages. So there's an old saying in coaching that every defense, whether zone or man, every defense is ultimately man-to-man if you run long enough, or if the play goes long enough. Every coverage is man-to-man eventually. It's one-on-one eventually. What pattern matching does is it's essentially a set of rules. There's a good book on this. I've got it on my shelf over here. I actually was talking to the author of it not long ago. He visited up here in North Carolina, and Mac Brown actually introduced him and me together, and we got to chat a good bit. But Mike Olivadotti, who coached down in Miami, but the book is called Coaching Pattern Read Coverage. And if you really want more on this now, I mean, the place to go is matchquarters.com. They do a great job explaining a lot of it. But the basic idea is that you are applying a bunch of rules, and also there's specific communication checks and so on, where, it's a single word where it explains what you're supposed to do, that essentially you have a zone call. And then there are rules for how you defend different players coming into your zone. And then if no player is actually coming into your zone, how you respond to that. And the goal of read coverages is that you essentially don't have guys covering grass. You always have guys covering the man that would be appropriate to them based on what their essential zone is. So if you think about this, and it's hard to explain this without going into video, but if you think about this from, let's say you've got 3 wide receivers, you've got a trips formation, you've got then a corner, you've got a nickel, and then you've got a safety over the top, and then a linebacker inside. So you got 4 coverage players that are ultimately in some sort of zone relationship. And let's say it's a quarters type coverage. So the corner and the safety each have deep responsibility in a quarter of the field. And then the nickel is going to have some sort of curl flat responsibility. And then the linebacker is going to have that hook zone into the curl zone responsibility. So the way that this is going to work is, with those trips, offenses can do all sorts of different things to make things difficult for defenses. And if you just go man-to-man, one of the things that they can do is just do switch concepts and rub concepts, so that as you're trying to chase through, all of a sudden you run into somebody and the guy you're responsible for is somewhere else. It's just very easy. So one way to stop that is to just go zone coverage. And those guys don't chase the man that they would be responsible for. They just pick up. When that guy comes into their grass, they pick him up. There are downsides to each of these. So on the man side, again, you're dealing with the problem of rub routes. On the zone side, good receivers just find grass and sit down before they get to wherever you're covering, the grass that you're covering. They just find that seam and sit down. That's what you coach guys to do. Throttle down. There's a variety of different ways you do this. So what pattern matching does is it applies a bunch of rules. So the corner, he's responsible for any vertical from number 1, and he's reading, his eyes are on the number 1 receiver, which is the furthest out receiver, but his eyes are on his responsibility number 1, and he reads through number 1 with his eyes to number 2, and then peripheral vision number 3. And if the number 1 receiver on the outside goes inside on his release, then he's reading through that number 1. He kind of comes inside a little bit with him, just shuffles a little bit, but his eyes are looking through number 1 to number 2 and number 3 to see which of those guys is actually going to come outside, because receivers don't normally all go to the same place. So he just waits, or he kind of adjusts and then switches to whichever guy comes outside, and then he picks him up right there, instead of just dropping to grass, he's going to pick him up in a little tighter kind of coverage situation, and it becomes essentially man at that point. So that's your basic idea of pattern matching. Now, the thing is, there are so many different route combinations. There's so many different ways to so many different things you have to defend, that you have to spend a lot of time just repping this over and over and over again in practice to be able to get this right. That makes it hard. So you have to spend a lot of your teaching time just making sure that guys are getting their pattern match principles correct based on what they're seeing. And you just have to rep it over and over and over and over again. It's sort of like if you're going to play a 3-2 matchup zone in basketball, you'd better commit to being a 3-2 matchup zone team, because if you just play it once in a while, you're probably not going to be very good at it. But if you commit to it, like Syracuse did, under Jim Boeheim, and that's your thing, then it can get suffocating, because you just have you have the muscle memory and the reactions built in to everything that teams are going to do. And then if you recruit to it and you're really good at what you coach, you've doubled down on that. Now, Florida State got really good at that, at pattern matching for the most part, under their last defensive coordinator. That's something that Fuller actually taught pretty well. Now, they did have some breakdowns, especially last year in 2024. But overall, they were a pattern match defense that focused heavily on essentially getting their few pattern match coverages right over and over and over again. They were a cover 7 most of the time. And this was, as we talked about last year and the year before, you constantly hear people say, oh, they run all man coverage. They're running man coverage all the time. And I'm going, no, they're not. No, they're not. They're in cover 7. They're in cover 7. It's not man. It's a matchup zone. But hey, you do you. You're telling on yourself yet again. But this is the way that it works. So the thing is, the reason that Tony White doesn't use more pattern matching is because his style of defense is a little bit more about being multiple and running more coverage variation, different looks up front, bringing pressure from different places and all of that. And the thing is, if you're going to do all of that, and you're going to pattern match, a lot of times you end up not being good at either one. So what you do is you teach the basics of spot dropping, and then you coach recognition of routes so that guys don't cover grass, all the time. You still are getting your eyes and sort of within the confines of your zone and all of this. You're doing what you can to match okay. I mean, you're not just wanting guys to run to grass, but you don't get the same amount of time to spend on just repping that over and over and over again. There's just not unlimited reps to be able to run that sort of thing in practice. And that's one of the difficult things about coaching, is to be a good coach. One of the things you have to do is you have to decide, what are we going to be good at? What's going to be our identity? Because you can't be good at everything. Any coach who's going to try to be good at everything is going to have a bad football team. You have to say, are we going to be a run team? Are we going to be a team that throws the rock? Are we going to be an air raid type team? Like, what are we going to do? What are we going to rep? Defensively, are we going to be a heavy pressure team that's going to be multiple and different kind of zone defenses behind it, so that guys have to learn sort of what their patterns are on all that and communicate and make sure that, that guy's going to come with pressure this time, and then that guy's going to come with pressure the next time, and do some of those things? Or are we going to be a heavy pattern match team? Which, again, that's the Saban, Belichick. They were kind of the architects of modern pattern matching stuff. That's their defensive stuff. But the Saban tree in college football, Smart, those guys, they're all running that pattern match base. And most modern teams these days, and in the pros as well, they're kind of basing out of a cover 7, which is a quarters family coverage. That is your cover 7 read, match quarters. That's what you're going to run. And then everything else is sort of iterated off of that. And, a lot of teams basically run either match quarters or some sort of middle of the field close coverage. They basically rotate to some version of cover 1 or cover 3, and it's a match cover 3. And so you'll go like Pitt, which is, look, if I had my choice on what defensive system to install at Florida State, it would be basically Pitt's defense, which is essentially, you're going to run a match quarters coverage. Now, they like to go match quarters with press corners. So a lot of times they're actually matching less in their quarters. They're spot dropping more, but they're not even dropping their corners. They're just pressing. So you're going to go quarters and then hot pressure and a couple other different pressures where it's essentially a 3 deep, 2 under pressure look. And they're just going to try to force you to get the football out and stop the run on the way to the quarterback. That's what they do. Super aggressive. There's some pluses to it, but that's a team like that is going to spend less time on working on pattern matching exactly than on their pressure packages, than on getting their fronts right, than on their technique and some other things for those things. And White has invested on those things more than he wants to put the time in terms of pattern matching. Could he coach it? Probably, but it's not what he does. And there are a lot of defenses these days in college football that don't match as much as they used to. You know, pattern matching through the let's say 2005 to 2018 or so, all of the best defenses basically were going pattern matching. But the issue is that as essentially the pendulum swings back and you get more teams that become physical run teams and more teams that focus on essentially screwing around with pattern matching rules to make it difficult with all sorts of follow routes and different things that essentially double up, then defenses kind of have adjusted. And there's sort of been a swing to more spot drop defenses that are less complicated to teach, less sophisticated in the secondary, but are counting on other aspects to win. And Tony White's one of those guys. That's basically all it is. So hopefully that helps. Hopefully that makes some sense of it. But yeah, it does need to get a lot better, a lot faster. So yeah. So the next question is this is asked right after the Pitt game. You're in charge. What do you do tomorrow? Are there position coaching changes? Obviously, you have to invest in the offensive line, defensive line, linebacker, and pass rush. Is there a fix? Be specific if you could. And then I followed up with that is in charge as in the athletic director or as in the head coach? And then the response was, okay, answer both, head coach first, then AD. Okay, so first of all, the first thing I'm doing as the head coach is I'm essentially projecting confidence to my players and saying, look, the truth of the matter is we now have 3 losses. We're not going to hit our playoff goal for the year, and that's too bad. We've cost ourselves too many times. But look, we have lost to 3 really good football teams. We've beaten arguably the best team in the country right now in Alabama. We've lost to a top 5 team in a game where essentially 3 turnovers, you gave that game away. So we can play with anybody in the country. We've played like a top 5 team in both of our matchups against top 5 teams. Beat one, lost to the other. If you split against top 5 teams, you're fine. Right? That usually means you're a good football team. The other 2 games, again, it's as simple as turnovers and lapses of concentration, a few things that we've got to clean up just to get right. And this is where what I would be saying as a head coach is, this is where I have to do a better job of holding you accountable and demanding out of you that you do what we're coaching you to do. And so what I'm doing is I'm doubling down, and I'm telling my team, I'm doubling down on what we do. And we're not going to put up with any slippage in any practice. And if you don't want to deal with that, then we'll find somebody else who can do that. But then all you do is you try to turn up the intensity in practice, and you focus on the things that you haven't done very well. You focus on ball security, and then otherwise you're just repping and executing. Look, I'm of the view that Florida State. I was just looking at the EPA per play and per drive numbers for the season. Florida State on the season has played essentially at the level of the number 13 team in the country. They've played 3 top 25 teams, and they're 1-2 against those 3. And then Pitt is another one who's outside the top 25 that they lost to as well. But basically you look at it and you go, look, we've been good. on a lot of things, but there's some stuff that we have to be accountable for. We have to get a lot better on, and we're not going to put up with slippage in practice. The biggest thing is dealing with some busts in the back end in terms of linebackers and DBs, and then turnovers. So for me, it's about doubling down on accountability in the program and communicating confidence that as long as we are accountable, we can beat everybody else on our schedule. As a head coach, that's what I'm doing. And then in recruiting, I am demanding that my coaches double down on their efforts, triple down on their efforts, and that they demonstrate what they're doing week in, week out to actually get things done and to land the kind of talent that they need to land. And I know, look, I've lost momentum, but that's what we're going to do. The other thing is that I'm also preparing with the Battle's End and others, and we'll talk more about this in a future date. But I'm trying to make sure that we have some powder ready, powder dry for the end of the cycle. Because in recent years, Florida State has been in good position with some top players, only to have other teams come in and sweep in with last minute sweetening the pot offers, and Florida State's put their best offer on the table too early. So what am I doing? I'm going to take the other route. I'm going to kind of play it cool till the end of that. I'm going to make sure that my guys are continuing to make contact and that they're doing everything that they can. And then I'm going to try to flip some guys, and I'm going to try to sweeten the pot and maybe overpay for some guys at premium positions in recruiting after this season. Again, taking the strategy that a few of the teams that have beaten me for teams have done in putting the money on the table last and saying, okay, well, here you go. So that's what I would do as a head coach. Now, as the AD, first thing I'm doing is I'm going in and I'm saying, look, you guys have to do better, or, the masses are at the door. You know that. But other than that, I don't know that there's much I would want to do as an AD, other than maybe one of the things that I would require is I'd say, look, I think you need a full-on GM who's a little bit more independent, and I'm going to go out and find a top-level GM for you to work with that really can focus on being all in on recruiting. And he's going to be the guy that your assistants and so on are going to report to hold them accountable for recruiting, to absolutely hold their feet to the fire on that. Maybe that. But there's not a whole lot there that I would do because, again, I don't think it's prudent to fire Mike Norvell at this point. Knowing what I know about some of the headwinds that he's dealt with in terms of administratively, in terms of NIL. I mean, some people are like, well, Virginia, you talk about paying for roster and everything, but, you lose to Virginia, and Virginia's not doing. Virginia paid $2.7 million more than Florida State in the most recent NIL reporting. Their roster was about $2.7 million more expensive than Florida State's. Don't underestimate how much money Virginia paid for Chandler Morris and all of those guys that they got in, plus the recruits from this last cycle, but mostly for their portal guys. In terms of last year's NIL, and again, this year is a whole kind of different thing because of the way that Florida State has approached things with the post-house stuff, and athletic director Alford has been very serious about treating that revenue share deal as a true salary cap. And think about that for a second. How many of you out there think that, say, Ohio State or Michigan or Ole Miss are out there doing that? That they're absolutely 100% abiding by the house rules and the salary cap, and nobody's getting any additional money other than revenue share? How many of you actually think that? Because, yeah. Anyway, but last cycle, so not the revenue share stuff that we're talking about this year, and again, that's its own issue, but we'll get to that in another date. Last cycle, Florida State, including Vandy, who doesn't actually report numbers because of being private, but they've also paid quite a bit. Florida State would have been 13th in the AC or in the SEC in roster in amount of money toward the roster. 13th. So what am I doing as the AD? One thing I'm not doing is discouraging any connection with the battle's end and with, any sort of external NIL funding and that sort of thing. I'm definitely not doing that. I'm trying to find extra money to make sure that I can build up the best possible roster that I can, recognizing that the house salary cap is a joke. That's what I'm doing. But hey, what do I know? There are certainly some Florida State influencers and media types out there and so on who would, poo-poo that and say, no, it's all about, what kind of personality you have at head coach. That's what really matters. And some guys can recruit and some guys can't. And, it's not about money. Look, it's not all about money. It's not. I mean, I've gone on the record with that before. Some coaches get discounts and some do not. Some like Kirby Smart and Georgia generally get a discount these days because they're saying, look at the success we've had at Georgia. Do you want 800,000 down to go down there? Or do you want 600 or 500,000 to come here? Will you feel the difference? What you will feel the difference of is that we're a better program and you really want to play for us, right? So some guys do get discounts, no doubt. That happens. But money matters too. And if you're not in the ballpark enough, then that's going to be an issue. And then if you're trying, the other thing is the coaches who get discounts are guys who've built enough and have shown year over year enough that they don't have to overpay because people just want to be a part of what they know is most likely to be a championship situation for them. That's how that works. So if Florida State had been able to stack a really good 2024 on 2023, you're probably looking at Mike Norvell getting the championship coach discount, essentially, or the top level coach discount at that point. But the guy's faced a ton of headwinds since he got to Florida State, and then had COVID shut everything down. He's had to deal with those headwinds. He hasn't had the advantage of being able to recruit at a discount, which he might have been able to do at one point, and I think he still might be able to do if he's able to get things right eventually. But before that, when you're trying to build, Miami hasn't been going at a discount. Cristobal is not getting discounted recruits. They're paying a premium to get guys to go down to Miami. Texas Tech this cycle, they weren't getting guys on a discount. But see, you pay out like that 2 or 3 years, and you overpay for 2 or 3 years to get to essentially create the program, and then you start getting guys at a discount later. So what would I do as an AD? I would find every way possible to find money and ways to get the best players possible on my campus. Recognizing, essentially matching the way that everybody else is doing this, but putting more money on the table than them. That's what I would be doing. But again, what do I know? There's other people out there who know way more than I do. So on this front especially. So we'll just defer to those who consistently say that no, it's not about money. It's really just about Mike Norvell and personality or whatever. Or, I don't like his slogans or something, whatever. Fine. Okay, so we're almost a half an hour in, and now it's time to get to the actual preview of the game to come. This is the Stanford game. And, the first thing to talk about here is we're looking at a 10:30 p.m. game on the West Coast. And, question is, how much does that matter? And I say it does matter a lot. If you look at the difference between playing those late games, and there's a reason for Pac-12 after dark. Those kind of after dark games, I think, have a lot more variability. There's a much higher delta of possibilities that happen in those games, especially when you have an East Coast team going way west and playing past bedtime. And look, let's not pretend that these guys go to bed early every night, but they're still not, getting ready to practice or to compete at a top level at 10:30 at night. They're just not doing that. And yeah, your body gets into rhythms. I mean, those of you out there who are who are regular exercisers, who, some of you are, 4:30 in the morning, 5:30 in the morning exercisers, and your body gets primed for that. Like, that's the time you wake up and your body's just primed to get into it. Other people, it's like, 5:30, 6:00 in the afternoon, evening. That's when you work out. That's when you go on your run, and your body's just primed for it. And if you did it at another time, you just wouldn't be sort of in the same mode or easily enough or as easily getting into the kind of rhythm that you're trying to get into. It's a lot harder. That's really the difference here. So, and you can see the difference also. Anytime a West Coast team goes east and plays at noon Eastern, which is 9:00 in the morning, that's an even bigger deal than playing at night for the East Coast teams playing at night. But I mean, you see this in the NFL. When you get East Coast teams going to the West and playing at night, they play worse. West Coast teams coming east and playing 1:00 in the afternoon, they play worse. Look at the quality of play when teams go to England or Ireland. It's always worse. So yeah, it's a factor. And I would say somewhere it's probably about a 6-point difference compared to playing at a time that you're used to playing at. So yeah, this makes this game a lot more dangerous for Florida State than it would be if it was played at, say, 3:30 Eastern. It's a much more dangerous game. And then if you look at what Stanford's done this year, Stanford, they have 2 wins on the year. Stanford is 2-4. Both of their wins are home games. 30-20 over Boston College and 30-29 over San Jose State. All 4 of their losses are road games at Hawaii, at BYU, at Virginia, at SMU. Now, some of that is home away, sure. The other part is that the 4 teams that they've played on the road, 3 of those 4 are actually pretty good teams. BYU's a legit team. They lost 27-3. Virginia beat them 48-20 at Virginia. And SMU beat them 34-10. So they got drummed pretty good by those 3 that were the quality teams that they played. So that's part of that. The other thing is that the other aspect of the quality thing is Boston College is terrible. They're 1-5, only win against an FCS, and they got beat 48-7 by Pitt. That's a bad Boston College team. They don't have Castellanos to save him this year, so. But that's a bad Boston College team. And like I said, 48-7 lost to Pitt, and then they lost to Stanford 30-20. So that's kind of where you're standing on that. So I do think it's a factor in terms of time. It's a soft factor, but I do think it matters. I think it's maybe about a touchdown difference in terms of what you would expect in this game. And I think it increases the variability, the possibilities of what might happen. That said, Stanford is the worst team that Florida State will have played outside of East Texas A&M and Kent State. Both of those teams are really, really bad. Stanford would beat both of those teams, I think, fairly comfortably. Certainly East Texas A&M. But they'd beat Kent State by 30, probably. But they're not in the same zip code as Alabama, Virginia, Miami, and Pitt. Again, Pitt beat BC 48-7. Stanford beat BC at home 30-20. So that kind of gives you some indication of where things are. Another thing to think about here, and so we're just going to start on Stanford's offensive side. Stanford has not run the football pretty much at all this season, except against Hawaii and Boston College. Against Hawaii, it was 4.12 yards per carry in the opener. And then Boston College was 5.76 yards per carry. And BC has, by the way, given up a bunch of rushing yards all season. They haven't been able to stop the run. Looking at BC's defense here. BC's defense has given up 4.26 to Michigan State, 5.76 to Stanford, 3.19 to Cal, who's not run the ball on anybody, 4 yards per carry against Pitt, and 5.26 against Clemson. So they've not been stopping the run against anybody. And then you look at Stanford, it's the one team they've run it on. Everybody else against BYU, 0.79 yards per carry, 24 carries for 19 yards. Against Virginia, 1.13 yards per carry, 31 carries for 35 yards. San Jose State held them to 26 carries for 37 yards, 1.42 yards per carry, and then they went 2.27 yards per carry. They had 75 yards against SMU. They've not been able to run the football because they just aren't very good on the offensive line. And one of the other ways that you can tell that, I think at one point SMU, I think SMU came into the game with 12 total sacks going into the Stanford game. And they had, they gave up 6 total sacks to SMU. So SMU, like I said, they had, it was 13 sacks going into the Stanford game. And then they had almost half as many against Stanford alone compared to what they'd had the rest of their schedule. And by the way, 5 of those prior 13 had come at Missouri State. So they'd been averaging two sacks per game against, a little under 2 sacks per game against FBS competition. And they had 6 against Stanford. And Stanford's offensive line just got overwhelmed, honestly. And that's what I've seen when I've watched Stanford so far this year is it's a team that really just, they aren't all that good up front on the offensive line. So they're not able to run the football and they've not really been able to protect their quarterback. And that's been absolutely killer for them. That's made it really hard. Now, the other side to this is Ben Gulbranson, who's the senior quarterback there, has actually been pretty good. He makes some throws here and there. Now, he's got 4 picks, 6 touchdowns. So, close to a 50-50 there, which is not great. Just under 60% passing. But some of that is just that he's been thrown under duress. But every so often, when he gets time, he actually can make throws downfield. He's got a strong arm. He's got a couple receivers I do like. 3, there is their leading receiver, CJ Williams. He's a good player. But, and he will find space if they don't pressure him at all. But this is one of those games where if I'm Tony White, I come into this and I say, you know what? I don't think they have guys that are just going to beat me all over the field. And I don't think they can block me if I bring 5 and 6. I think I'm going to be in the backfield all game. And I just don't think that they have the athletes outside to make me pay. So what am I going to do? I'm going to simplify this. I'm going to bring guys from different angles. This is a game where go ahead and bring 5 and 6 the whole game. No reason not to. Because Gulbranson has not been the same guy when he's under duress. When he's able to step in and throw, he can make big time throws. So make it simple. To me, on the year, they've been 5.12 yards per play. And that's including a couple games where they're not playing against, top level competition. Against SMU, they were at 4.77 yards per play, 5.35 against Virginia, 6.76, that's the outlier, against Boston College, 2.88 at BYU. I think you can shut this offense down. I think this is one of those games where even with it being on the road, even with it being at night, I think this is a game where you can give up 4.5 yards per play, that area. Somewhere in that zone. Now they scored 10 points on 4.77 yards per play against SMU. They shot themselves in the foot a bunch in that game with a bunch of penalties. And they had let's see, in that one, I'm having to look it up. I just remember they had a bunch. Yeah, they had 10 penalties in that game for 95 yards. So maybe they don't do that and shoot themselves in the foot. But, I think this is a team that you should. Tony White's defense should hold this team under 20 points. Should. Is it possible it goes worse? Sure. But this is not like what I said against both Pitt and against Virginia, where I was like, look, these teams are probably going to score 30 points. It's going to be a lot to keep those guys to that because these are bad matchups for this defense. This is a better matchup for this defense. This is a team that you should be able to hold to like 10 points, but under 20 is, kind of expectation. I think your magic number for the offense is right around 24 points. You score that, you probably win this game because Stanford has not put up a bunch of points this year against anybody. The most they've scored is 30 against Boston College and against San Jose State. Those are their 2 wins. I think if I'm going to go out on a limb here, I'm going to say about 4.5 yards per play, maybe a little bit less. Wouldn't be surprised to see him under 4 and somewhere between 10 and 13 points. That would be my expectation. So then if we flip over to the offensive side, Florida State offense against Stanford's defense, Stanford's defense has not had a whole lot of help from their offense, but they've not been bad. They've not been, I'll just say this, they've not been terrible. They have given up some plays in the run game, though. Virginia, 42 carries, 206 yards, 4.9 yards per carry. SMU, 24 carries for 122, 5.08 yards per carry. And then passing game, they've given up a bunch of passing yards. UVA threw for almost 400. San Jose State threw for almost 500. 473 yards for San Jose State. 247 for SMU, running a very similar offense with a similar type quarterback in Jennings to what Florida State's running. I mean, remember, SMU is running Malzahn's offense basically with Rhett Lashley. So SMU won 34-10. They scored 34 points, and that was with some mistakes. So I think that's kind of your comp there. And I think Malzahn and Florida State's offense has been better this season than SMU's offense. SMU went for 6.83 yards per play and 34 points. And this is one where I think you can run the football, like I said. I don't think it's a serious problem to pass against this team either, because I think offensive line-wise, you should be able to handle their defensive line. And in the secondary, they're not fast. That is not a fast secondary. This is one of those games where if you've got a Squirrel White healthy, and I haven't seen the when I'm recording this, Florida State has not released the injury report. But, if you've got Squirrel White healthy, this is a game where he could go off. Danzy, this is a game where he could go off. This is a game where your running backs, if they get into space, there's opportunities for big plays. I mean, SMU had an 87-yard run at one point, which 87 yards on one run and 122 total, that tells you that they actually didn't run the ball that well the rest of the game. But you're going to have opportunities for chunk plays against this team. So if you're Gus Malzahn, I'm coming into this game and I'm saying I think I can pound this team, and I think my backs are going to be able to get into the secondary and make big plays. And I think I can go for 7 yards per play in this game and put this on ice. And this is one of those games where you don't need to play with your food here. You should be able to double tap, even, again, 10:30 at night, doesn't matter. Go ahead and take care of business early. And I think Florida State's going to do that in this game. And, you're still not going to quiet the masses. You're still not going to have anybody happy about the 3 losses in a row these last 3 games. Still going to have a bunch of people who are saying, well, it's Stanford. But you'll see the difference when a team that's been playing like a top 15 team in the country that's just had a couple bad losses, one to another top 20 team, one to a top 5 team, and then one to about a top 35 team. Well, now you're playing a bottom quartile team. Now, this is one you can't lose if you're Mike Norvell, if you're Florida State. Like, this would be, I warned everybody going into the Virginia game and into the Pitt game. Don't be surprised if Florida State loses either of these games. These are very losable games. These are good football teams, and they are bad matchups for what FSU does, etc. This is not that. This is a team you have no business losing to. You lose this game, I don't think they're going to lose this game, but this is one of those where you lose this game and people are going to be talking tarmac firing stuff. So yeah, I think this one is one where I'm going to go ahead and get this to the prediction portion of the show. I think this one is a get right game for Mike Norvell and for Florida State, despite the fact that it's that late game and other disadvantages there, all the travel and all of that. I think they probably do kick it around a little bit early as they find their feet. And, maybe they aren't in the position to finish it as well as you'd like. But I think during those middle quarters, I think Florida State just flexes and runs away. I think they're better on both lines. And I think as long as they don't, this is one where I think you probably have to be -3 or -4 to lose in the turnover margin. It probably has to be one of those nights. And so, I'm going to go with Florida State, about a 90% chance of winning this game. And I'm going to go with Florida State 45, Stanford 13 for my score. This is a get-right game. This is a bad matchup for Stanford, which is the first time that's been that way for Florida State since the Alabama game, where, I kept saying styles make fights, and right now this is not a great style for this FSU team with what they're facing. You don't have a Chandler Morris. I don't think that Gulbranson, the quarterback for Stanford, is going to go, full Chandler Morris or do what Heinzel did this last week. If he does, I do think you have to consider more seriously some things that I wouldn't consider at this point. But I like I said, I think Florida State would have to probably be -3 or -4 in the turnover column to drop this one. I don't think that's likely. I think they come out from the ACC Pacific Coast version of the ACC. It's so weird. After dark, and I think they emerge victorious 45-13 against a Stanford team that just I don't think has the matchup stuff in the secondary in terms of skill positions and also on the lines. So we'll wrap there. This has been Unconquered with Doc Staples. I'm your host, Doc Staples. Thanks for listening. If you've been enjoying this podcast, please leave a 5-star rating over at Apple Podcasts and wherever else you listen to podcasts. Post and repost episodes on social media and tell a friend. And if you haven't left a review in a while, do it again. It really does help the visibility of the podcast. Before we go, I'd also like to thank my advertising partners once more. That's EPR Creations, Luis Marquez of Momentum Realty in Jacksonville, Florida, Shenandoah Real Estate in the Research Triangle of North Carolina, Garage Makeovers, the #1 garage remodeling company in South Florida, and Justin Galloway of Benchmark Mortgage, serving Florida, Tennessee, and Kentucky. You can also stop by the Unconquered Shop at unconqueredpodcast.com, where you can buy stickers, pins, magnets, t-shirts, and other swag. I am especially grateful for those of you at the Dynasty level. That is Brian Leininger, Dave Blair, Jack Horton, Jonathan Kennedy, Lee Caswell, Travis Smith, and Tyler Kashishki. You all are far more generous than I deserve. Thanks to you all. This has been Unconquered with Doc Staples. I'm your host, Jason Staples. Thanks for listening, and thanks for your support. I made this.